What if the darkest government experiment in American history didn't actually end? What if the real story of MK Ultra isn't about LSD, rogue agents, or secret torture rooms in the 1950s, but about something far more familiar, something still shaping your choices today? Because MK Ultra wasn't madness, it wasn't chaos, it wasn't a conspiracy gone off the rails, it was a prototype. A test run for a question so dangerous that every intelligence agency, every advertiser, every tech company, and every market is still trying to answer it. If you can influence how people think, can you control what they do? And if you can control what they do, you can control everything built on human behavior: money, politics, markets, beliefs, loyalty, even reality itself. Most people hear MK Ultra and think of myths. I'm here to tell you the truth is worse, not because the experiments were shocking, but because their legacy never died, it evolved. Welcome to the story they hoped you would forget. Before MK Ultra became a scandal, before it became a whispered legend on conspiracy forums or a footnote in declassified files, it was an answer to a fear so deep it shook governments. To understand why MK Ultra was created, you have to step back into a world that was losing its certainty. The early 1950s weren't peaceful. They were unstable, unpredictable, and psychologically terrifying. The Korean War had just ended, but the shockwaves hadn't. American prisoners of war returned home saying things they shouldn't have believed, praising communism, condemning their own country, confessing to impossible crimes. It wasn't just strange, it felt unnatural. Rumors swirled about Soviet hypnosis, Chinese thought reform, psychological torture chambers, and secret programs to break the human will. The Cold War had become something new, not a battle of armies, but a battle for the human mind. Inside the CIA's headquarters, this fear metastasized into an idea that changed everything. If enemies can break the mind, maybe we can rebuild it. And if we can rebuild it, we can control it. MK Ultra wasn't science fiction, it wasn't madness, it wasn't a mistake. It was the logical conclusion of a world terrified of losing control. A world where governments believed that survival depended not on armies, but on influence, on perception, on the ability to shape human behavior before the enemy could. And in that world, normal ethics didn't stand a chance. Millions of dollars were quietly funneled into hidden labs, universities, hospitals, and front organizations no one has ever heard of. Researchers were told to push boundaries. Doctors were told to ignore restraint. Scientists were told to explore what the human mind could endure and how far it could bend. Not because the CIA wanted chaos, but because they believed that whoever mastered influence would master the future. MK Ultra was not an experiment. It was an investment in a question that would define the next 70 years. What happens when power discovers that controlling behavior is more valuable than controlling territory? That question didn't die with MK Ultra. It spread. It evolved. And its methods became the foundation for every system that shapes your perception today. It didn't begin with LSD. It didn't begin with hypnosis or secret safe houses or whispered instructions behind one-way mirrors. It began with fear. Fear so loud it echoed through entire governments. Fear of losing not land, not weapons, but control. In the early 1950s, a kind of terror swept through Washington that had nothing to do with tanks or missiles. It was a fear of ideas. Ideas that could burrow into a soldier's mind and overwrite his loyalty like a piece of faulty code. American POWs came home from Korea saying things that didn't sound like them, praising their captors, criticizing America, answering questions like someone had reached inside their heads and rewired something fundamental. Newspapers called it brainwashing. Politicians called it subversion. But inside the CIA, they called it something much more dangerous: proof. Proof that the mind was a battlefield. Proof that psychology could be a weapon. Proof that influence, not bullets, might win the next war. Every analyst, every general, every intelligence officer felt the same chill. If the Soviets or the Chinese had found a way to manipulate thought, America could lose the war without a single nuclear strike. And in a world divided between two superpowers, fear is enough to create monsters. Inside the CIA's newly strengthened Covert Operations Division, a belief took root. If the enemy can shape the mind, we must learn to shape it better. It was no longer about defense, it was about dominance. So they began looking for experts, psychologists, doctors, neuroscientists, anyone who could help decode the human psyche. They weren't searching for torture techniques. They were searching for predictability. Because the goal wasn't chaos, the goal was control, influence, suggestion, compliance, a way to guide decisions before the target even realized the decision had been made. The kind of control every government dreams of and every marketplace eventually depends on. It didn't matter anymore whether the science was ethical. It didn't matter whether the theories were proven. What mattered was the race, a silent psychological arms race where the weapon wasn't a bomb, but the human mind itself. In 1953, the CIA crossed a line, not because they were reckless, but because they believed the world had already crossed it. And in that moment, the most infamous project in American intelligence history was born. MKUltra wasn't launched with chaos. It was launched with purpose. A purpose wrapped in secrecy, driven by fear, and executed through a network so vast that even Congress didn't know it existed. And what that network became over the next 2 decades would change the world far beyond espionage. MKUltra did not explode into chaos overnight. It began quietly, almost politely. A few grants here, a few research inquiries there, a handful of professors asked to explore the boundaries of human consciousness. But those boundaries widened fast. Because the CIA quickly realized something critical. If you want to bend the human mind, you don't need to run the experiments yourself. You just need to fund the people who will. And so the money began to flow. Not in suitcases or secret envelopes, but through foundations, charities, academic grants, and institutions respected enough to never question where the funding came from. Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, Cornell, McGill, hospitals, clinics, prisons, private laboratories, pharmaceutical companies. Some knew exactly what they were participating in. Most did not. The CIA created front organizations, fake research centers, foundations with noble-sounding names, and used them to funnel millions of dollars into experiments no ethics board would dare approve. And what these institutions received was not just funding, but freedom. Freedom to act without oversight. Freedom to push boundaries. Freedom to abandon the rules that protect human dignity in the name of national security. What emerged was not a research program. It was a shadow economy, a network of doctors, scientists, chemists, and professors who were rewarded not for integrity, but for results. If you look at the paper trail, the truth becomes obvious. MKUltra didn't operate like a secret lab. It operated like a marketplace. Money flowed to whoever promised influence. More influence meant more funding. More funding meant more extreme methods. More extreme methods meant more data. It was capitalism weaponized by intelligence, a system where the prize wasn't profit, but behavioral control. And as this shadow economy grew, so did its ambition. The CIA didn't just want to manipulate a prisoner's mind, or an enemy spy, or a defector. They wanted to know, can you influence someone without them knowing? Can you guide a decision without force? Can you shape loyalty without violence? Can you predict human behavior well enough to control it? These were not scientific questions. They were strategic ones. And in the 1950s, these same questions were being asked in a completely different world, one far more familiar. Madison Avenue, home of the modern advertising industry, was beginning its own experiments in psychological persuasion. Corporations wanted to know what makes people buy, what makes them trust, what makes them choose one brand over another. 2 worlds, one covert, one commercial, were asking the same question at the same time. How do you engineer human behavior? MKUltra was the dark mirror of the emerging persuasion economy. One used secrecy, the other used strategy. Both used psychology. Both built systems that would reshape the modern world. And as MKUltra expanded into 109 known sub-projects, with likely dozens more destroyed or hidden, a dangerous truth began to emerge. The intelligence community and the marketplace were learning from the same playbook. And once those two forces aligned, there was no going back. MKUltra did not explode into chaos overnight. It began quietly, almost politely. A few grants here, a few research inquiries there, a handful of professors asked to explore the boundaries of human consciousness. But those boundaries widened fast. Because the CIA quickly realized something critical. If you want to bend the human mind, you don't need to run the experiments yourself. You just need to fund the people who will. And so the money began to flow. Not in suitcases or secret envelopes, but through foundations, charities, academic grants, and institutions respected enough to never question where the funding came from. Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, Cornell, McGill, hospitals, clinics, prisons, private laboratories, pharmaceutical companies. Some knew exactly what they were participating in. Most did not. The CIA created front organizations, fake research centers, foundations with noble-sounding names, and used them to funnel millions of dollars into experiments no ethics board would dare approve. And what these institutions received was not just funding, but freedom. Freedom to act without oversight. Freedom to push boundaries. Freedom to abandon the rules that protect human dignity in the name of national security. What emerged was not a research program. It was a shadow economy, a network of doctors, scientists, chemists, and professors who were rewarded not for integrity, but for results. If you look at the paper trail, the truth becomes obvious. MKUltra didn't operate like a secret lab. It operated like a marketplace. Money flowed to whoever promised influence. More influence meant more funding. More funding meant more extreme methods. More extreme methods meant more data. It was capitalism weaponized by intelligence, a system where the prize wasn't profit, but behavioral control. And as this shadow economy grew, so did its ambition. The CIA didn't just want to manipulate a prisoner's mind, or an enemy spy, or a defector. They wanted to know, can you influence someone without them knowing? Can you guide a decision without force? Can you shape loyalty without violence? Can you predict human behavior well enough to control it? These were not scientific questions. They were strategic ones. And in the 1950s, these same questions were being asked in a completely different world, one far more familiar. Madison Avenue, home of the modern advertising industry, was beginning its own experiments in psychological persuasion. Corporations wanted to know what makes people buy, what makes them trust, what makes them choose one brand over another. Two worlds, one covert, one commercial, were asking the same question at the same time. How do you engineer human behavior? MK Ultra was the dark mirror of the emerging persuasion economy. One used secrecy, the other used strategy. Both used psychology. Both built systems that would reshape the modern world. And as MK Ultra expanded into 109 known sub-projects, with likely dozens more destroyed or hidden, a dangerous truth began to emerge. The intelligence community and the marketplace were learning from the same playbook. And once those two forces aligned, there was no going back. Once the money started flowing, once the foundations were established, once the researchers were given budgets that no ordinary institution could match, the boundaries vanished. What began as behavioral research mutated into something far more dangerous. The CIA wasn't chasing curiosity anymore. They were hunting for leverage, a technique, a pattern, a trigger, a formula that could break a mind and rebuild it in a predictable shape. And in that pursuit, the methods grew darker. LSD, still a rare experimental compound in the 1950s, became a weapon of exploration. It was slipped into drinks, injected without consent, administered to people with no idea that the reality was about to dissolve. Doctors watched, agents took notes, researchers observed hallucinations like they were equations unfolding on a chalkboard, and LSD was only the beginning. Subjects were locked in dark rooms for days, left in sensory deprivation tanks, stripped of sound, of light, of human contact until their minds fragmented. Some were hypnotized so deeply that they forgot who they were. Others were pushed through extreme repatterning, forced to hear the same phrase hundreds of thousands of times through looping tape recorders designed to override identity. Electroshock machines were used not at therapeutic levels but at intensities meant to erase memory. People who checked into hospitals seeking help or treatment found themselves involuntary participants in experiments designed to dismantle them. Prisoners, students, soldiers, mental patients, ordinary citizens, many never knew what happened to them. Even fewer ever recovered. MK Ultra was not designed to heal. It was designed to test limits, how much pain a mind could endure before surrendering control. But here is the part that makes these experiments even more chilling. The CIA wasn't doing this blindly. They were watching for patterns, behavioral changes they believed could be monetized, weaponized, or embedded into psychological operations. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were strategic. MK Ultra was looking for the mechanism that could predict the human response with the same reliability that markets predict a transaction. Because if you can predict a person's behavior, you can guide it. If you can guide it, you can shape it. If you can shape it, you can control the systems built on top of that behavior. Governments, politics, markets, ideology. Influence wasn't just power, it was infrastructure. And as the Cold War intensified, the CIA became convinced that whoever mastered influence would master the battlefield of the future. This belief is what pushed MK Ultra from the edges of ethics to the edges of humanity. But the story doesn't end there. Because as these experiments grew more extreme, a new truth emerged. One that would change the trajectory of MK Ultra and the modern world. A truth that shows MK Ultra didn't die because it failed. It died because its success became too dangerous to continue. The deeper MK Ultra went, the further it drifted from anything resembling research. At some point, no one could even pretend this was about science anymore. It had become something else, a machine without brakes, a system fueled by fear, ambition, and secrecy, where the only goal was to push the human mind past limits it was never meant to reach. And because the program was buried so deeply inside classified budgets and covert channels, there was no oversight, no accountability, no ethics, no one to say, stop, so the experiments escalated. One of the most infamous branches ran under a project so surreal it sounds like fiction, Project Midnight Climax. In hidden safe houses in San Francisco and New York, the CIA hired sex workers to lure unsuspecting men into apartments wired with cameras and one-way mirrors. Behind the glass, agents watched as the men were secretly dosed with LSD and left to unravel while someone took notes. This wasn't intelligence gathering. It wasn't national security. It was voyeurism mixed with weaponized science, the kind of experiment born only in a world where secrecy has replaced morality. Then there was Sub-Project 68 in Montreal, the work of Dr. Ewan Cameron, a respected psychiatrist who became one of MKUltra's most devastating architects. Under CIA-funded grants, he took vulnerable patients, people suffering from anxiety, depression, postpartum symptoms, mild trauma, and subjected them to massive drug overdoses. It can chemically induce comas, days of sensory isolation, is CII, voltage electroshock. It was erasure, erased them out, and washed stripped or cisgist, stripped of menaced to stripped of menaced, traumatized, stripped of memory, identity, stability. Some never spoke normally again, some never spoke normally again, some never spoke normally again. Some forgot their families, some forgot themselves, and yet the funding continued. The CIA didn't care about the casualties, they cared about whether Cameron's methods could reveal the blueprint of behavior. The morality of the program was never measured in lives lost, only in data gained. This was MKUltra at its darkest, a point where the line between research and brutality had evaporated completely, a point where the CIA proved something horrifying: if a system is powerful enough and secret enough, it can operate without conscience. For 2 decades, MKUltra operated like a ghost, invisible to the public, untouchable by Congress, protected by layers of secrecy so deep that even many inside the CIA didn't know it existed. It could have continued for another 20 years, maybe longer. It had the funding, it had the secrecy, it had the momentum. But MKUltra didn't collapse because it went too far. It collapsed because the world around it erupted. The early 1970s were an earthquake beneath the American intelligence system. Watergate shattered trust in the White House. Investigative journalism was gaining power. Whistleblowers were emerging, and Congress, humiliated by the scandals, finally demanded to know what else the government had been hiding. For the first time in decades, the CIA felt something it was not used to feeling: exposure. Directors were being questioned, operations were being audited, oversight committees were forming, the press was hungry, politicians wanted answers, and MKUltra was the one secret that could not survive sunlight. The CIA understood immediately that if the full truth ever came out, the drugs, the prisoners, the safe houses, the hospitals, the universities, the experiments on unwitting civilians, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be an extinction event for the agency's legitimacy. So in 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms made a decision that sealed MKUltra's fate: destroy the evidence. All of it. Every file, every record, every document. It was an order issued quietly, executed quickly, and obeyed without hesitation. Roomfuls of files, decades of experiments, were fed into shredders and incinerators. The CIA didn't end MKUltra, they erased it. Or at least, they tried. Because a few boxes, just a few, escaped destruction. Financial documents, expense reports, stray memos, correspondence between front organizations and university labs. Not enough to reveal everything, but enough to prove that something had happened, something huge, something illegal, something horrifying. And when those fragments surfaced, the truth didn't explode. It leaked, slowly, relentlessly, like a crack in a dam that can no longer hold. Journalists followed the financial trails. Victims began piecing together their pasts. Senators demanded hearings. The public, already distrustful from Watergate, was ready to believe that the government had crossed the line, because it had. And the little that survived was enough to expose the tip of an iceberg that the CIA hoped the world would never see. But here's the twist. Even as MKUltra collapsed under scrutiny, its legacy didn't die. Its methods, its lessons, its principles, they migrated. From intelligence agencies to universities, from universities to corporations, from corporations to the emerging digital world that would soon blur the line between influence and technology. MKUltra didn't disappear, it changed shape. And what it became would affect far more people than the CIA ever could have reached in a basement laboratory. MKUltra was never supposed to be found, and when pieces of it finally surfaced, through hearings, leaks, and the few documents the CIA failed to burn, the public was horrified. Congress condemned it. The media exposed it. The agency denied the worst of it. Politicians demanded reforms. The CIA promised oversight. America told itself that this kind of thing would never happen again. And officially, the program died. But programs don't die just because their names are retired. What MKUltra proved, what it funded, what it tested, what it mapped out, was far too valuable to simply vanish. Because the core discovery the CIA walked away with was not that LSD could break a mind, or that hypnosis could bend a will, or that sensory deprivation could fracture identity. Those were primitive tools. Early experiments, the shadows of a much bigger truth. Human behavior is predictable. Human perception is malleable. Human decisions can be influenced without force, without violence, without awareness. That knowledge didn't disappear. It migrated. And its next destination wasn't a government basement. It was the marketplace, the private sector. Advertisers, marketers, polling companies, behavioral economists, and early tech pioneers absorbed the very insight MK Ultra had spent 20 years chasing. Influence wasn't a weapon. Influence was capital. And the smartest institutions realized that whoever controlled attention controlled belief. Whoever controlled belief controlled decisions. Whoever controlled decisions controlled markets, politics, and culture. MK Ultra was crude. It relied on force because it lacked something the modern world was about to discover: voluntary data. While the CIA experimented on hundreds in secret, the emerging consumer economy learned to influence millions in broad daylight. Madison Avenue built emotional advertising. Universities built behavioral labs. Economists redefined decision-making science. Corporations hired psychologists to study desire, fear, loyalty, habit. The tools sharpened. The methods improved. The ethics dissolved under profit. And then technology arrived. The internet didn't just open a new frontier, it opened a vein. People began offering their behavior, freely, constantly, unconsciously, to companies that measured every click, every scroll, every purchase, every hesitation. Silicon Valley didn't need LSD to study minds. They had something better: data. Billions of data points mapping fear, joy, curiosity, loneliness, envy, the entire emotional spectrum served on a digital platter. MK Ultra tried to break minds to understand them. Modern tech companies study minds as naturally as they study profits. And with each advancement, the line between understanding behavior and steering behavior began to blur. Not with torture, not with coercion, not with secrecy, but with design, interfaces engineered for addiction, algorithms engineered for persuasion, notifications engineered for compulsion, platforms engineered to shape attention. MK Ultra wanted to control thought, to win geopolitical war. Today, corporations and algorithms shape thought to win the war for engagement. Different battlefield, same target. MK Ultra was not the end. It was the first chapter of a story that now belongs to an entire global industry. A story where the tools are cleaner, the methods are invisible, and the subjects are not a few hundred people, but billions. As the dust of MK Ultra settled, as Congress held its hearings and the CIA buried its guilt under bureaucracy, something else was happening quietly, something the public never connected to the story. A new field was rising, a field built not on chemicals or hypnosis, not on secret safe houses or psychological torture, but on data, on biases, on mathematical models that treated human behavior not as mystery, but as a predictable pattern. Behavioral psychology was merging with economics, and that single merger changed everything. For decades, economists believed that humans were rational creatures, that we made decisions based on logic, self-interest, and clear calculations. But then came researchers like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, scientists who proved that humans are anything but rational. We are impulsive, we are emotional, we are biased, we are irrational in ways that are completely predictable. Fear, greed, loss aversion, confirmation bias, anchoring, herd mentality, choice overload, time discounting. These weren't just scientific curiosities. They were predictive models. And suddenly, institutions realized something enormous. If you can predict behavior, you can shape behavior. If you can shape behavior, you can control behavior. And if you can control behavior, you can control the systems built on behavior. Markets, elections, advertising, media, investing, consumption. What MK Ultra tried to do with drugs and deprivation, behavioral economics could now do with far more precision and without breaking any laws. Governments began using nudges, small design tweaks that gently push public behavior without anyone noticing. Corporations redesigned advertisements based on emotional triggers, not logic. Financial institutions built algorithms that predict when people feel fear or greed, because fear and greed move markets faster than any piece of news. News outlets learned which stories triggered outrage because outrage keeps viewers watching. Tech platforms learned which posts keep you scrolling because scrolling prints money. The modern economy quietly evolved into a behavioral laboratory. Consent wasn't removed, it was redirected. Manipulation didn't require secrecy, it required data. And at the center of that transformation was the very lesson MK Ultra had uncovered decades earlier. Human behavior is the most valuable commodity in the world. It's more valuable than oil, more valuable than gold, more valuable than data itself. Because behavior is the source of every market decision, every political choice, every social trend, every economic cycle. And the more institutions understood it, the more they invested in the ability to shape it. Influence was no longer a covert operation. Influence had become an industry, multi-billion-dollar companies, global advertising empires, think tanks, polling agencies, social platforms, behavioral labs, financial analytics firms, political campaigns. Everyone, everywhere was now using a refined, sanitized, commercial version of the same idea MK Ultra had once tried to weaponize, not to erase minds, but to guide them, not to break identities, but to harness them, not to control thought, but to control attention. Because once you control attention, you control reality. MK Ultra was a warning. The modern world turned it into a blueprint. By the time the 1990s arrived, MK Ultra was a ghost, a story buried in shredded files, half denied by the CIA, half forgotten by the public. But the world it helped create was only just beginning to emerge. Because the greatest shift in human history was about to happen, and it wasn't happening in secret labs or government basements, it was happening in technology. The internet didn't just change communication, it changed human behavior. And unlike the CIA, which struggled to find test subjects and relied on deception, tech companies had something that MK Ultra could never achieve: voluntary participation. Billions of people willingly sharing their habits, emotions, preferences, fears, desires, vulnerabilities. Not under duress, not under LSD, not under hypnosis, but under convenience, under curiosity, under entertainment. Every tap, every click, every swipe, every pause, every late-night Google search became a data point in a growing profile, a portrait more accurate than any interrogation could produce. What MK Ultra tried to extract through force, the digital world extracted through design. Algorithms learned faster than psychologists. Platforms learned faster than governments. Apps learned faster than intelligence agencies. Human behavior. Once the great mystery of the Cold War was now mapped, quantified, predicted by lines of code running billions of simulations per second. This was the birth of the attention economy, a global system built not on controlling minds, but on capturing them. And in this new world, influence became scalable. MK Ultra experimented on dozens. Corporations influenced millions. Platforms influenced billions, not by breaking the mind, but by shaping it. Not by torture, but by design. Interfaces engineered to trigger dopamine. Notifications engineered to hijack impulses. Feeds engineered to keep you watching. Recommendations engineered to amplify emotion. Ads engineered to bypass rationality. MK Ultra forced people to hallucinate. Social media convinced people to hallucinate voluntarily. MK Ultra erased identities. The digital world reconstructed identities based on algorithmic patterns. MK Ultra wanted to create obedience. Technology created dependence. This is the part that most people overlook. Modern influence doesn't need secrecy. It doesn't need black budgets. It doesn't need covert operations. It works best when the subject feels free. Because the ultimate form of control isn't forcing a decision. It's shaping the environment where that decision feels natural. Governments study disinformation. Corporations study engagement. Hedge funds study emotional volatility. Political strategists study persuasion. Tech companies study attention. Every major institution is now fighting the same battle MK Ultra fought in the shadows, the battle for the human mind. But there's one final twist, the most important twist of all. The tools that once belonged to intelligence agencies now belong to corporations whose influence crosses borders faster than any government ever could. For the first time in history, the power to shape human behavior at scale doesn't belong to a nation-state. It belongs to the platforms that decide what the world sees. MK Ultra wasn't a dead program. It was a prototype for the most profitable industries on Earth. The intelligence agencies started the experiment, but Silicon Valley perfected it. And now, every day, every hour, every notification, the world participates in a system that MK Ultra could only dream of building. A system where influence isn't a secret, it's a business model. A system where control isn't hidden, it's accepted. A system where the battleground isn't a brain in a laboratory, it's you, your attention, your decisions, your perceptions, molded quietly by the world you interact with every time you unlock your phone. This is the final evolution of everything MK Ultra set in motion, and what comes next is the part that matters the most. So after all the secrets, all the experiments, all the shredded files and buried confessions, what does MK Ultra truly teach us? Not that the government lost its mind, Not that the CIA went rogue, not that history is darker than we were told. It teaches us something far more unsettling. Power always evolves, and influence never dies. MK Ultra ended on paper, but its core idea, that human behavior is the ultimate resource, became the foundation of modern society, not through torture, not through chemicals, not through covert operations, but through systems so smooth, so convenient, so ever-present that people stopped noticing the architecture altogether. Behavioral economics, emotional advertising, political messaging, MPA idea. Didis is together. Attention-engineered platforms, algorithmic feeds, persuasion technology at a global scale. This is the world we inherited from MK Ultra, a world where influence is no longer a secret mission, it's a trillion-dollar marketplace. A world where institutions don't need to break your mind to shape it, they just need your attention. A world where control doesn't come from force, it comes from design. And that's the part of MK Ultra that matters the most. Not what the CIA did in the 1950s, but what every major institution, government, corporate, digital, learned from the aftermath, that the human mind is a battlefield worth investing in. Because if you can predict behavior, you can guide behavior. If you can guide behavior, you can control outcomes. And if you can control outcomes, you control the world built on those outcomes. Markets, politics, economies, beliefs, culture, reality. That was the dream behind MK Ultra. And today, that dream isn't hidden in a basement or locked behind classified documents. It's glowing on the screen you're looking at right now. The experiment never ended. It simply changed hands. And the final truth is this. The most powerful systems in the world don't control people with fear. They control them with choice. Choice that feels free. Choice that feels personal. Choice that feels like your own, even when the path was designed long before you walked it. MK Ultra was the warning. The modern world is the consequence. Horrors. And now that you've seen the blueprint, the only question left is, who's influencing your mind and who's profiting from it?